I think this is proof positive that God really loves the Guard, because he always gives us good weekends. And as I said, good morning. General Park, Colonel Reynolds, parents of our friends that we wish to honor here today, family members, unit members, and guests. Today we will dedicate this wonderful building behind me, the new home of the 101st Operations Group and its members, and we'll conduct a very special remembrance of 4 very special individuals. These individuals were all longtime members of this unit. They are family members and special friends of all of us. They all embodied the spirit of the citizen soldier and died or became ill while serving as members of this unit. At this time, I would like to ask Chaplain Dickinson to come on up and open this ceremony with the prayer. Patrick?
Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In vain you rise up early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Let us pray. Almighty God, we are gathered together to offer thanks to you and to honor the memory of the men and women who have served this unit, this state, and this country with the 101st Air Refueling Wing. To offer you thanks as well for the men and women who do serve and who will serve. We know that the duty by its very nature exposes men and women to danger and to forfeiture of life. Receive then our praise and thanks for putting it into the hearts of men and women so to serve. We ask that you would instill in our hearts the same desire that has moved them to lay down their lives. Grant to us such wisdom as to know our role, such courage as to choose doing what needs to be done, and that resolution of heart to follow through and play our part well. We ask for these blessings and offer this praise for the honor of your name, for the welfare of our state and country. Blessing of the families represented by both. Amen.
C5 hit his mark perfectly, didn't he? The 4 Guardsmen we want to remember today were all loyal and faithful American citizens. They all cherished the highest ideals of citizenship and understood the sacrifices necessary to make this country the absolute best country in the world. Each one also understood and lived by the core values of the Air Force and the Air National Guard. These core values are the same ones that every Maine Air National Guardsman lives by today. Master Sergeant Michael Brooks was a special friend to all of us. His constant smile, sense of humor, and endearing friendship made working with him a true pleasure. Mike always made sure that the crews were well taken care of, as he always looked out for their welfare. Service before self. Master Sergeant George Hardesty was the consummate professional. George was always correct. You could count on it. And you could feel assured that all of our survival gear would work as advertised when we needed it. George loved engineering changes and improving our equipment. He also loved the challenge that went along with it. Excellence in all we do. Captain Paul Coleman embodied the spirit of the Air National Guard aircrew member. Paul was always quick with his wit and humor, but he was always equally quick to volunteer for any mission. He thereby demonstrated this unit's capability. Paul was an outstanding Air Force navigator. excellence in all we do. And Senior Master Sergeant Paul Lord, he had a wonderful sense of mission requirements and personal abilities. He was a valued advisor to all. And he kept the needs of the unit and the goals of all parties intertwined. Paul was a leader in the field of electronic combat crew communications. His expertise was valued at the local and the national level as well. Integrity. As you can see, each of these men was unique, ways just like each other. They are all proud to be guardsmen. They were even prouder to be called maniacs. And they were all the very best in their field, were loved and respected by all of us and everyone that knew them. We are proud to have known them, and even better, proud to have served with them. I would ask at this time for any of you that would have special remembrances of these individuals to either please stand and give it in place or come up here and use the microphone. Anyone?
Thanks, Colonel Damon. I haven't seen Marion and Dick Grover for a couple years, about 4 years. And when I saw her, she said, come over for a swim. And I asked her, can I take a friend? Some friends. She said, sure. So we all, after this, we'd go to Marion's for a swim. I'm going to kind of keep this upbeat, and each of these guys touched me in some way. I'm going to talk about Paul Lord predominantly, but I'd like to say a little bit about the other three. I met Paul Coleman in 1982. He picked me up at the airport in California when I was off to nav school. And later that summer, I went over for supper and met his daughter. His daughter was an infant. I don't think she's here today. But a couple weeks later, then he called me in my dorm room, asked me to buy his car. I didn't have a car. And I said, no, I'd rather not. I'm going to wait. Well, his car was a black Chevy Chevette. Later on, I went out and I bought a black Chevette from a dealer. And when I returned to Bangor, Amy, his wife, was livid with me. She was angry, and she said, you could have bought my car. I wanted my car, and I'm angry. And I remember Paul coming up to me, and he put his arm around me, and he said, that's okay, buddy. She's mad at you. She's not mad at me. Mike Brooks gave me something that I'll forever thank him for, but it was Mike's stories about Acadia in Acadia National Park, the carriage trails with his daughter Christy and Erica, and I thank him. Fit in there on alert and hear all the stories about Door Mountain. And I remember one particular story where you did the carriage trails all day on your bikes, and then you stopped at the Jordan Pond House for tea and popovers. Well, after being there for a while, you were very tired and you couldn't ride your bikes back to the car. So he got on his bike, drove back to the car, got the car, and came and picked you up at the Jordan Pond House. Is this true? Did that happen? Anyway, he really loved you guys, and you could see in his eyes when he was telling the story. And I thank Mike for sharing these stories with me. And, I can remember with George Hardesty, one day I walked in the life support, and I opened the door very quickly, and it seemed so a certain general officer on this base had that certain way of opening the doors. His name was Hesed. But George jumped up, he had his feet up, he was leaned back, relaxed, and he jumped up, and he jumped up, and I sensed what was going on, and I just smiled. You thought I was Hesed, didn't you? And if you ever knew George, he had this big smile, and he sat back in his chair and put his feet back up and went on. I think the real person that affected me most was Paul Lord. I've told him this, and told Debbie and some people. Paul was one of my heroes. As Colonel Damon mentioned, we have core values in the Air Force, and it's basically a guide we follow for ethical, when we have ethical dilemma, or it's what we follow that make us unique as Air Force members. Integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. These core values came out pretty much after Paul left us, and I believe Paul exuded and displayed them and lived by them even before they were published. And I'd like to share with you each one of those. But before I do, I saw Joe Phillip on here, and there was good memories with me, you, and Paul, and I believe John Dickinson was with us, going to Gabby's, generally at lunch for our sandwich, about 10 years ago in the late 80s, early 90s. And I remember John Dickinson and I always used to sit in the back and let Paul sit in the front seat because we always felt Paul outranked us just by the way Paul carried himself and held himself in his professionalism. If one of us, we would have put you in the back seat, Joe.
Back.
But integrity first. I believe Paul, he showed integrity every moment of every day. He never tried to bypass the system or rig the system. He did everything by the book. There was one time, I'd like to have to remind myself or talk about it now, but it was basically easier for Paul if he had just forgotten what the incident. And I can tell you after what it was, but he just felt, let's use the system. We're not going to gloss over it. We'll do the investigation, and that'll be best. It'll all work out. But another sign I have for somebody who has lots of integrity is the use of language. And I've never heard Paul use vulgar language, ever. When things were going bad and things were getting worse, I never heard him, never use a colorful metaphor. And Debbie Rice will confirm. He was the perfect, quintessential gentleman. And I never lost his cool, and I respected him for that. He just was amazing. Service before self. We all know he dedicated his life to combat communications and the betterment of combat communications. He was the expert in SAC and AMC, and people called him from all over, asking for advice. And he was the leader of many Tiger teams, solving problems and stuff. But I want to share this story that I heard earlier about his love of his boat, and his love of his, and it's tied to service before self, but his love of his Maine Coon cat, Icarus. Well, you all know Paul loved sailing, and he also loved his cat. Not many people out here knew that he loved his cat. He was in love with his cat, but it seems so his cat on his boat got caught between the fiberglass and the inside of the boat. And so the cat stuck in there, and was stuck in there for a period of time. I'm not sure how long, perhaps hours. Days? 8 hours. So Paul, now remember, he loved his boat. He cut a hole in the wood to get at his cat and rescue his cat. And I just found that to be so sweet and really the true expression of service before self. Had we known that he had done that, he would have gotten a lot of teasing and stuff like that. And I don't know if Julie here, Julie, you wouldn't have said anything, would have you? You would have left him alone about that. Okay. And just finally, there were some days I was in here as supervisor flying, working on Saturdays. It was a rainy day, and I'd see Paul's car there, and I'd go knock on the door and come in, sit down, and say, Paul, what are you doing? And he just muttered and said, well, Nadine, it's working, and it's raining, and I want to get this done. And there were a lot of days like that. There were a lot of those days. But excellence in all we do. I've been criticized and told that I'm sort of neat and kind of like things organized and stuff. Well, it's not true. People said I was born that way. It's genetic. Well, it's not. It's something that's learned. And those of you that knew Paul know that he was excessively neat and could do things and had to have things just right. And I built 3 PSYOP revisions under Paul, and I learned everything my neatness from Paul. He was I was going to call myself Felix Unger from The Odd Couple, but we both had some of those character traits. And I talked about this before, but I can remember drawing my first chart. My first strip chart was 12 years ago in 1988. I was just new to the vault, and I thought this thing was perfect, and said, Paul, can you take a look at this? And he came over, And he looked at it, and there was the, And Debbie and Bobby know, Nadine probably know what I'm talking about, but that's the sign of, well, it's not quite up to snuff. So he took me under his wing and under his arm and helped me and nurtured me, and I'm grateful for him for doing that. And I am grateful and I had the opportunity to work with such a craftsman, because he really was a craftsman, a true gentleman. But in closing, I really am a better person for knowing him. I learned a lot watching him and being with him, and I remember trips and Pisa and you know, going out to dinner and supper, and is just my role model. And I miss him, and there's not a day goes by where I don't think about him. And if there was ever a class act, it was Paul Lord. Thank you.
I'm not going to speak of all four. My attention will focus on my friend George Hardesty. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to talk about George. The gist of my speech then involved the many and varied descriptions of the man. It seemed there were as many descriptions of George as there were people who knew him. Looking back on that speech in preparation for this ceremony today, I decided to add one more description, my description: teacher. It is said we all have a song to sing or a story to tell. Some tell their stories by their words, others by their actions. George used both. I met George in 1982 when I joined the life support section. I was a spry, young, 21-year-old punk, not too sure of anything, really. He was already one of the vanguard of the unit, and joined some 20 years earlier. I went full-time in 1986, and it was then that my first lesson with George the teacher began. In those first few years with George, I'd come to know that George truly, truly believed there was nothing he couldn't build or repair. I would marvel at his ability to bust into something, figure out how it worked, and fix what was broken. But more than that, I was in awe of his willingness to even try it in the first place. He was awful hard on me to build my own home. You got to get that piece of land, he says. Just build your own home. I'm telling you, you can do it. When I balk at the notion and vehemently deny my own ability to do such a thing, he would begin to tell me of how he and his wife, Linda, did that very thing. Now, for some, this might come across as a lot of chest thumping and look what I did. But with George, it always came across as, look, son, if I did it, surely you can. He'd tell me, he said, when I drove that last nail, I knew that I owned this place. His craftsmanship extended far beyond houses, into garages and aircraft hangars. I think I helped him pour some concrete for one of them, and eventually 2 absolutely magnificent airplanes. Any of you had an opportunity to fly with George in his airplanes? It was truly a treat. I enjoyed both planes with him on separate occasions. And again, I would marvel, and I'd say to him, George, how do you know how to do this stuff? And he'd say, well, sometimes I get a magazine and I read about it. Other times, he says, I just get in there and I figure it out. Today at 39, I'm a 14-year subscriber to the magazine The Family Handyman. My sons, Corey and Jacob, believe that I can fix anything. In fact, a few weeks ago, my wife was dreaming aloud about her desire to have a pool in the backyard. When my oldest son, Corey, piped up and said, well, just get Dad to build. When my wife said, well, no, Dad can't build a pool. And my son said, yes, he can. He simply has to read one of the magazines and he'll build one. My first lesson from George: believe in yourself and in your ability to do anything you set your mind to. My second lesson from the teacher was closely tied to the first. You see, George's craftsmanship extended, as I mentioned, beyond houses and garages, into and all the way down to model airplanes, a field in which he was widely respected for not only his ability to construct, but also to fly. These times for him were hardly free from failure, to put it mildly. Some of my favorite stories with George were about his model airplane fiascos, as a matter of fact. And in fact, the story I like to tell these days involves another of George's not-so-successful ventures with a video camera. You see, George had recently purchased a new video camera. I think it was an 8mm, if I'm not mistaken. And shortly after purchasing, the hand strap hook. Typical to George, he was going to fix it. He got set on the workbench and he began to disassemble this camera. There were several pieces and many, many screws laid on the bench when a co-worker and friend, Micah Rogerson, happened by. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Micah. If George's motto was, "There's nothing broken that I can't fix," Micah's motto was, "There's nothing fixed that I can't break and fix it again." Both men have very similar minds, both very good people. Micah, with his head peering over the shoulder of George, says, "So George, did you mark the screws?" "Why?" "Well, because they're all of different lengths." With a quick glance, George deduced that that was incorrect. "No, they're not." Micah shrugged and parted from the room. I watched George, though, as he took a little closer examination of the screws, and by God, Micah was right. And again, in typical Georgesque fashion, the wheels turned, and he bowled ahead. "I'll figure it out." To his credit, the camera eventually was put back together. But Micah, I don't believe I ever shot another inch of film, did it?
Is that why you went out and bought a new one?
My second lesson from George: do not let the fear of failure keep you from trying. My third lesson is not so much about building and repairing, but more about life itself. I've always been physically active, and in those days I would take advantage of the physical training or PT time we were afforded by working out here. I would appear from my office in the general work area in my gym clothes, and as always, with a huff or a grunt, George would make some wise comment about me running off to play, as he called them, kids' games. Well, that would convince he and Paul Lord to join an aerobics class that we had on base. Now, you understand aerobics. Aerobics starts out easy, and it builds in intensity. You go from step, clap, and a step, turn, clap, jump, and all this stuff. Well, as we progressed in intensity, you would watch George, and he would remain at step, clap, clap. Following one of the classes, as I'm wiping down the sweat, and George is simply changing his dry clothes and continuing to work, I said, "George, you know, you really need to crank it up a bit, pal. You need to get that old heart pumping." And he stopped, dead serious, looked me square in the eyes, and said, "Son, you know you only have so many ticks in this thing, and I'm conserving mine." Then on an October night, several years ago, with many more ticks left to go, George was taken from us. My third lesson: live each day and every day of your life to its fullest. My final lesson to George: remember I told you George was adamant about me building my own house, and he tried many tactics to convince me that this was the only way to go. One of his sayings to me, often he'd look at me and he'd say, "You know, just think, you'd be leaving something of yourself behind. Long after you're gone, a little bit of yourself will remain." Today, we dedicate this building to 4 very special people. One of those very special people was George Richard Hardesty. May it stand and serve to remind us all of the lessons he left behind. Believe in yourself and in your ability to do anything you set your mind to. Don't let the fear of failure keep you from trying. Live each and every day to its fullest, and leave a little something of yourself behind.
Well, I too knew all 4, and had a wonderful time working with them and knowing them. And we had many good times together. And I want to speak of Mike Brooks primarily, but all 4 are remembered in my heart and always will be. Mike was a guy that, when I would come on alert, was always, always happy. He always had a great joke and would do anything for the air crew. And that made sitting alert very, very nice for us. No matter what went on, Mike could always fix it for us. And I know Mike loved life. Mike was one of those people that would look at life as a glass half full, not half empty. And he loved his family as much as he loved life. So for us to work around Mike was just a joy. Mike was an avid golfer. And although I am not, Mike would jump on anytime we sent an airplane down to Florida. Then Mike and Skippy would jump on the airplane. And off they'd go with the golf clubs in tow. And Skip's sister Lois lived down close to Tampa, where we would always end up. And I know he and Mike would go out every day that we were there and play golf from dawn to dusk. I don't know how many holes these guys would put in, but it was incredible. And then they would all retire to Lois's house for roast beef or pot roast. I can't remember which one Skip said. And Mike would eat so much that Skip said all he could do afterward was just lay on the couch and moan. So, Mike was always one of those, as I said before, that would lend a helping hand. He always wanted to help. And I know at some point Lois had a problem with Michael being a insurance salesman. Obviously very familiar with that whole aspect of life. Well, Lois had a problem once with, I believe it was Metropolitan Life. And her husband had passed away, and MetLife was not doing what they were supposed to be doing. So on one of the trips down, Mike decided he would not go play golf and would drag Skip over to the regional office of MetLife. So into the office they go. They go right up to the top floor, and Mike walks in and demands to see the big guy. Refused to talk to anyone else except the boss, and resolved this issue for Lois to her satisfaction, and also resolved the issue for a class action suit that a number of others brought to Metropolitan Life. And that was Mike. He was always willing to help. He was always there to do things and make things right. Had a tremendous sense of fairness and love of life. The others that we worked with, Paul Coleman. I was one of the 4 people that when we formed up our boat club back in the 80s, I went down with Paul and Grinder and I think it was Jim Sexton or Bill Albert, I can't remember which now. We all went down to bring this boat up from New Jersey, and we had a grand time. Took us 3 days. We eventually got stranded and just out of the Cape Cod Canal. We're running out of gas and pulled into Biddeford Pool. But sailing days with Paul and Amy were grand times for me, and I'll always remember those. And George, it was always such a pleasure to walk into life support and talk to George. These airplanes he built and everything he did, I, as opposed to Dan, have done a lot of work on my house. My wife and I have renovated many houses. And so to go talk to George about all of those renovating things that he would do and techniques and the ways to do them, every now and then we certainly wouldn't agree on the ways to do them, but it was really, really fun to talk to George. Had a grand time. And of course, Paul Lord. Paul and I were very good friends, and we would go out to eat as couples and had a great time with Paul. Had a lot of respect for Paul, and my initial meeting with Paul was first down here. I'd gotten off active duty up at Loring. I came down here, and my first day in the squadron building was, I looked out the window and I saw this guy standing out by this barrel of burning stuff. And Paul was always burning. At this point in time, we could take the secrets that we were destroying and burn them in this barrel. And Paul was always over there, probably a couple of times a week, turning this barrel and burning stuff, and all the smoke and ashes coming out. And I said, I couldn't imagine who this person was. So later, once I got to meet Paul, it was we had a great time. Paul was the expert in all the secret things and all the secure building codes that we needed, especially when we built this building. Had a lot of input, and it was just, spent a lot of time with Paul, and I do miss him dearly, as I miss the rest. But Paul was certainly a special friend. And I thank Doug for the wonderful program today, dedicating this building to all of those people, and it's certainly just reward for what they gave us. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to speak today about Paul Coleman. Like Don and everyone else, all 4 are very dear to me, but Paul was exceptional. From the minute he came on the base, it seemed like we were flying together. He and Tommy Jones and Lauren, and we had kind of a little hardcore group there. And If I could say one thing about Paul, it was extreme intelligence overridden with extreme humor. He learned quickly. He became the ultimate crew member. He'd do anything. He was a great sailor, great sailor. Almost anything he tackled, he did well. I can't really get into a lot of Paul's social life, but with the same vim and vigor that he attacked the guard in his professional life, he would bring to a party as well. When Paul walked into a room, you could feel the energy shift. It would increase. He was the ultimate guard member. He loved it. He was there, early, late, whatever it took, and he was always ready for a party. Went all over the world with Paul. He never let me down once. He was a solid rock. Always could depend on him. And always could depend on him for a laugh. I don't think I ever called him up without him telling me a joke first. And he could remember them all. But the biggest lessons I learned from Paul is in his fight with cancer. He stayed in the moment. He never gave up. When they gave him 6 months to live, he didn't listen to it. And 8 years later, he still wasn't listening to it. He did everything. He walked away from the guard, loved it, went out on the island, took care of Mrs. Rockefeller. I went out there one day, and Paul was washing up, and I said, God, Paul, what are you doing? He had been up to his armpit, turning a calf to deliver. And that was Paul Coleman. Didn't matter. Went out to New York, back with his family, his wife's family. Started teaching school, teaching little kids how to read. Got into social programs, active in the community. He never stopped. He took every day, one moment at a time, and did the best he could. And if I can halfway live up to that, I'll be fine.
Thanks for those special thoughts. I would share two with you. One was I was at Scott for a couple of years at a staff meeting, and the AMCDO, General Velger, raised the issue that AMC had a problem because when we converted from SAC to Mobility Command, we threw away a lot of regs, a lot of which contained instructions on how to do combat crew comm, how to train for it. We had no training, we had no instructions or directions, and the problem was underway. And General Cross said, well, what is the fix? And this first I'd heard of the situation out there at that level. General Belger said, well, I think we have it fixed. We got a guy up in Bangor, Maine that knows all the rules, remembers them all, and he's going to take us out of this woods. So his guidance was appreciated at the national level, no question about it. The other thing is I always was glad when the airplanes came back from Florida, because with Brooksy around, you could always hear Skip Tardif stories for a long time afterwards. But I think you can see that each of these men was unique. They all helped shape the Guard and turn it into what it is today. And I think it's the finest flying fighting force in the free world, Chief. So, yeah. At this time, the 132nd Air Refueling Squadron Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Wilson, would like to read a piece that another maniac has written for this event today. Senior Master Sergeant Chuck Halstead wrote this in honor of the four individuals, and it's a very moving piece. Chuck couldn't be here today because he's on vacation with his family. After Mike reads this, we would like someone from each family to come on up and receive a framed copy of it and a rose that Debbie will pass out. So, Mike.
Thanks. Okay, this is entitled All Four. It was written by Chuck Halstead to fellow maniacs and friends. All four were unique. One was a craftsman with wood, metal, and fabric. One was recognized in his field as a leader and a trendsetter. One was an entrepreneur. One was a private businessman. All four served their country in different ways. One helped make sure that in case of an aircraft emergency, our air crews would have the best chance of survival. One helped make sure that in time of national emergency, our tactical crews would be alerted and sent on their way with as much pertinent information as possible. One made sure that when they were sent aloft to protect their country, the air crews would be properly trained so that they would be able to carry out their mission effectively. One stood alert so that when called, he would be able to help protect the country from any adversary. All four died courageously. One lost his life protecting his home. One died at his desk in pursuit of his duties. Two died after long and courageous battles with cancer. All four are missed. They were warriors of the highest order, devoted to their families, and dedicated to their comrades in arms, their state and their country. They were maniacs. In dedicating Squadron Operations Building 518 on 6 August 2000, the 101st Operations Group celebrates their lives as unit members. Let this celebration also be a challenge to all of those who enter here to excel in upholding the Air Force core values as all four did. Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. Master Sergeant Michael R. Brooks, Master Sergeant George R. Hardesty, Captain Paul R. Coleman, and Senior Master Sergeant Paul F. Lord.
Before we disperse, the members of the operations group invite everyone inside to see this wonderful building that we now call home, and enjoy some refreshments and fellowship. Concluding that, please join us down on the light duty ramp for our Wings Family Day. It's our opportunity to thank our families for supporting us. However, I would also like to thank some very special people that have made this event possible. I heard Don give me credit, but it's not true. This event would not be possible today without the work of three ladies that have worked tirelessly on it. Julie Peer, Debbie Rice, and Stephanie Ware. We owe you our thanks. Thank you. Chaplain Dickinson, would you come and close this out for us?
So for our thanks and praise to God. Almighty God, we thank you for the opportunity that this occasion has provided us to polish the memory of four beloved individuals. It is the desire of our hearts that by dedicating this building, the nerve center of this Wings flying mission, to the memory of these four men, we might provide regular to all who enter here and all who serve the flying mission of this unit with fresh and regular encouragement to emulate their commitment to integrity of character, service to others before self, and the pursuit of excellence in all that we do, thereby to honor their memory. Grant us this blessing, we pray. Amen.